You know how every January, millions of people just like declare they are turning over a new
Oh
leaf?
yeah, the classic New Year's resolution.
Right. But if you actually look at the biology of a tree, a leaf just dies and falls off. The tree itself hasn't changed at all.
Right, it's structurally the exact same.
Exactly. Next spring, it's just going to grow the exact same leaves. To actually change the tree, you have to alter the roots.
Which is so much harder to do.
Totally. And that's exactly why so many resolutions just biologically collapse by mid-February. I mean, people are treating a neurological root problem with a leaf-level solution.
Yeah, they are treating the symptom, not the cause.
Right. So today we were doing a deep dive into what actually happens inside your basal ganglia when you try to change. We're taking a massive, incredibly diverse stack of sources today.
We really are. We've got everything from ancient Stoicism and modern cognitive behavioral therapy to the neuroscience of habit formation and even the academic mechanics of deliberate practice.
Yeah, it's a huge stack. And our mission today is to bypass all the fluff of typical self-help. We are looking for the exact science-backed mechanisms of how human beings completely rewire their behavior to become their ideal selves.
Right, because before we can map out the mechanical steps of rewiring your brain, we first have to figure out what we're actually changing into.
Exactly.
You can't just decree that you are going to change your behavior without fundamentally altering the underlying structure that produced that behavior in the first place.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, James Clear's work in Atomic Habits, which is in our source stack, argues that true behavior change requires building identity-based habits.
Identity-based, right.
Because a goal just focuses on a fleeting result,
Yeah.
like running a marathon. But an identity focuses on the process of becoming a runner.
Okay, let's unpack this because setting goals without changing your underlying identity is like trying to navigate without knowing your destination.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right, like you can drive incredibly fast, but you're just going to get lost quicker. Every action you take is essentially this neurological vote for the type of person you wish to become. I think the sources say we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems.
Yeah, that's a huge takeaway. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this modern behavioral framework maps perfectly onto ancient philosophy.
Wait, really? Like the Stoics?
Yes, exactly. The Stoic philosophers Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius advised that transformation requires a point of focus. Epictetus taught that we all carry these seeds of greatness within us.
I love that phrase, seeds of greatness.
Right. But he said those seeds remain completely dormant until we actively identify a hero or an ideal to emulate.
So you have to know what you're aiming at.
Exactly. Marcus Aurelius actually opens his meditations not by listing his massive goals for the Roman Empire, but by systematically thanking his family members and mentors for specific moral traits he wanted to internalize.
Wow.
Yeah, he was basically auditing his own identity.
He was figuring out exactly what traits he needed to cast those neurological votes for. But, I mean, to even cast those votes, you need a profound level of self-awareness.
Oh, absolutely.
Because based on the Quinnipiac University psychology framework in our research, true self-improvement demands ruthless critical thinking to navigate your own cognitive biases.
Right, you have to be brutally honest with yourself.
Totally. You have to strip away the illusions you hold about your current habits. If you don't accurately diagnose your current identity, you can't purposefully architect a new one.
You have to step back and honestly assess the gap between who you are and who you want to be.
Which is hard.
It's incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because it requires you to admit where your current systems are failing you.
Yeah, but even if you have that profound self-awareness, you're going to hit a biological wall.
The brain's hardware.
Exactly. The moment you try to adopt this new identity, your brain's physical wiring actively rebels against you. Why is it so incredibly hard to bridge the gap between knowing who we want to be and actually executing the change?
Well, the research shows this isn't a moral failing or a lack of willpower. It is literally a matter of brain anatomy.
It's just biology.
Right. We have to look at how the brain manages energy. Conscious decisions, like the choice to adopt a new identity or start a complex project, they happen in the prefrontal cortex.
Okay.
And this area is highly analytical,
Wow.
but it is deeply metabolically expensive. Like it burns a lot of energy.
It takes actual calories to think hard.
Yes. So to save calories and keep you alive, your brain pushes as many behaviors as possible down into a region deep in the brain called the basal ganglia.
The autopilot.
Exactly. This is your autopilot engine where all your automatic routines and emotional memories are stored.
So it's essentially a biological survival mechanism.
Basically, yeah.
Like, in the early days of humankind, the reward center of our brains helped us seek out comfort and calories. So our sensory nervous system is just constantly scanning the environment for any action that will deliver a hit of dopamine.
Right. It's looking for that chemical reward.
Right. So when a behavior results in a reward like, say, the immediate sugar rush from a donut when you feel stressed, your brain builds this superhighway connecting the stress, the donut, and the relief.
Yeah, and MIT researchers call this the habit loop. It's the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward.
Cue, craving, response, reward.
Exactly. And through repetition, that loop gets buried in the basal ganglia. You are barely even aware of the craving before you've already eaten the donut.
It's just automatic.
Completely. And this phenomenon is known in the literature as experience-dependent neuroplasticity. Your brain passively rewires its physical structure to become more efficient at whatever you do repeatedly.
Regardless of whether that behavior is beneficial or totally destructive.
Right. The brain doesn't judge, it just automates.
So to break that passive cycle, we have to engage in what Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz calls self-directed neuroplasticity.
Yes, that's the key shift.
Instead of letting the environment just dictate our brain's wiring, we intentionally force the prefrontal cortex to grab the steering wheel back from the basal ganglia.
Through active reflection, yeah. And cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, provides a highly effective mechanism for this.
Attach, check, change method, right?
Exactly. So rather than treating this as just a simple mental checklist, you should think of it as a neurological emergency brake.
Oh, I like that, an emergency brake.
Yeah. When an automatic negative thought or a craving bubbles up from the basal ganglia, you catch it before it translates into action.
You catch it.
Right. Then you check its validity by forcing the analytical prefrontal cortex to evaluate the evidence.
Like, do I actually need this donut or am I just stressed?
Exactly. You evaluate it, and then finally, you change the thought into a more balanced, intentional perspective.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because, wait, my brain is actively fighting my conscious goals because the basal ganglia is basically addicted to the dopamine from my old routines.
Yeah.
So you can't just reason with the basal ganglia using logic, right?
No, not at all.
The basal ganglia does not care about your 10-year plan for cardiovascular health. It just cares about immediate dopamine.
That is literally what is happening, yeah. It just wants the chemical hit.
So to override an old routine, you have to essentially hijack your own neurochemistry. You have to link a new, difficult habit to an immediate, guaranteed reward.
Yes, you have to trick it.
Like, if you want to start running, you might only let yourself listen to your absolute favorite podcast while you're on the treadmill.
That's a classic example.
Your prefrontal cortex knows you were running for longevity, but your basal ganglia just knows, hey, I'm getting my podcast dopamine hit right now.
Exactly. You are bridging the gap between long-term abstract goals and short-term biological drives. By artificially injecting dopamine into the new routine, you trick the basal ganglia into accepting the new behavior.
Which brings us to the actual execution phase. Because understanding that we need to trick the brain's mechanical resistance is one thing.
Right. Theory versus practice.
Yeah, how do we practically force ourselves off the couch when the friction feels totally insurmountable? I mean, knowing I need to run and even having my podcast ready doesn't automatically put the running shoes on my feet.
No, it definitely doesn't. But the warrior mindset source introduces a psychological bypass for that exact friction.
The 2-minute rule.
The 2-minute rule, yes. The premise is to scale any new habit down until it takes less than 2 minutes to accomplish.
Just 2 minutes.
Right. You don't commit to a grueling 5-mile run. You literally only commit to putting on your shoes and stepping out the front door.
What fascinates me is the underlying mechanism here, because this taps into the Zeigarnik effect, which is named after psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik. Her research demonstrated that the human brain is neurochemically driven to complete unfinished tasks. It hates open loops.
It really does. Once you start an action, even just a 2-minute fragment of it, your brain registers it as an open loop that it urgently wants to close.
It creates an itch.
Yeah, because the friction is always highest at the starting line. The brain is calculating the total metabolic cost of the entire project and freaking out. But the 2-minute rule masks that cost.
It's like climbing a massive staircase.
Okay, yeah.
Looking at the top floor from the ground, triggers this sense of overwhelming fatigue. Your brain calculates the energy required and just says, no thanks.
Right, it shuts down.
But stepping onto the first step is easy. And once you're on that first step, the Zeigarnik effect triggers that neurological itch. It creates a subtle tension that actually makes you want to keep climbing just to resolve the sequence.
What's fascinating here is how we can systematize that climb even further by looking at the mechanisms behind James Clear's laws of behavior change.
Make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying.
Exactly. If you want to build a good habit, you alter your physical environment to reduce friction. Make the cues obvious, make the actions incredibly easy. But if you want to break a bad habit, you completely invert the process.
You deliberately introduce friction. I mean, if you want to stop eating junk food, you don't rely on willpower while staring at a jar of cookies on your kitchen counter.
That never works.
No. You put the cookies in a locked container in the basement. You are forcing the prefrontal cortex to wake up and acknowledge the effort required to get the cookies, which breaks the automatic sequence of the basal ganglia.
That's spot on. And to coordinate all of this environmental design, you need a targeting system.
Yeah.
The research points to the SMART framework.
Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound.
Right. But it's vital to understand why this works beyond just being a corporate buzzword.
Yeah, it's neuroscience.
It is. When you formulate a goal that has highly specific spatial and temporal metrics, meaning it is measurable and time-bound, you are literally shifting blood flow in your brain.
Shifting blood flow.
Yes. You are moving an abstract emotional wish out of the amygdala and forcing the prefrontal cortex to render it as a tangible, actionable map.
But the sources warn about a massive pitfall here.
Oh, the dependencies.
Right. If your spatial and temporal map depends on someone else's behavior, the map just breaks.
Yeah.
You can't set a metric to get promoted this year because you do not control the variables of your boss's mind or the company's budget.
No, you don't.
You have to set the metric to, complete an advanced leadership certification by June 1st. And critically, you have to write it down.
Always write it down.
Without the physical act of writing, the brain simply processes the goal as a fleeting simulation, not a concrete directive.
Okay, so let's look at the architecture we've built so far. You've audited your identity. You've used the 2-minute rule to bypass initial friction. You've established measurable metrics to guide your prefrontal cortex. And you've hijacked your basal ganglia with immediate rewards to put a positive habit entirely on autopilot.
But wait, isn't that a paradox?
How so?
Well, we just spent the last 20 minutes talking about how to successfully hack the basal ganglia to put habits on autopilot. Why do the sources suddenly suggest that autopilot is the enemy of mastery? Why would we want to break the exact automated system we just worked so hard to build?
It's a great question. It comes down to the distinction between basic competence and true mastery.
Okay.
If your objective is simply to perform an everyday skill efficiently, like driving to work or tying your shoes, autopilot is exactly what you want. It conserves cognitive energy.
Sure, I don't want to think about tying my shoes.
Exactly. But if your goal is to be truly exceptional at something, relying on the basal ganglia leads to a phenomenon researcher K. Anders Ericsson calls arrested development.
Arrested development. Because the research on deliberate practice completely shatters this massive cultural assumption we have.
Oh, big time.
We assume that mere experience automatically equals expertise. We think a doctor who has been practicing medicine for 20 years is inherently more skilled than a doctor who has been practicing for 5 years.
Which seems logical.
It does, but Ericsson's data shows that is fundamentally untrue. In many fields, performance actually decreases the further a professional gets from their initial training.
Because once that professional reaches an acceptable, satisfactory level of skill, their brain shifts the behavior to the basal ganglia.
It goes on autopilot.
Right. They stop actively problem solving. They just rely on heuristics and past experiences rather than engaging the metabolically expensive prefrontal cortex to analyze new information.
Like how a tennis player won't improve their backhand just by casually hitting balls with a friend every weekend.
Exactly. To achieve mastery, you must intentionally counteract automaticity.
You have to purposely make the task difficult again. You literally have to force yourself back into a state of cognitive discomfort.
Yes, and this is the absolute essence of deliberate practice. It requires active problem solving, seeking out immediate critical feedback, and constantly pushing yourself just beyond your current threshold of ability.
How far beyond?
Ericsson's research indicates you need to push about 10 to 20% beyond your normal operational speed.
The typing speed analogy in the sources perfectly illustrates this.
Oh, the typing one is great.
If you want to type faster, you don't just spend more hours casually typing emails. That just ingrains your current speed.
Right.
You literally have to force your fingers to move 10 to 20% faster than you can comfortably manage. And this forced acceleration causes you to make errors, which feels frustrating.
Super frustrating.
But that frustration is the biological trigger for adaptation. To keep up with the increased speed, your brain is forced to expand your visual gaze to read further ahead in the text. You are continually overloading the neurological system to compel physical adaptations.
Think of it as progressive overload for the brain.
Like weightlifting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In weightlifting, if you lift the exact same 10-pound dumbbell every day for a year, your muscle fibers will just stop adapting because there is no novel stimulus. Deliberate practice provides that novel stimulus to your neural pathways.
So what does this all mean for someone genuinely trying to rebuild their life? I mean, if you are relentlessly pushing yourself 20% beyond your capabilities, you are guaranteeing a high frequency of failure, stress, and adversity. It is biologically baked into the recipe of mastery. So how do you sustain this intense, continuous overload without your nervous system completely burning out?
This raises an important question about the actual mechanics of resilience. Because the Siskiyou Community Health Center defines resilience training not as simply, toughing it out.
It's not just grinning and bearing it.
No, it's a dynamic capacity cultivated across 4 areas: emotional, cognitive, physical, and spiritual domains. Resilience is the ability to efficiently regulate your nervous system so you can recover quickly from the inevitable failures of deliberate practice.
And the Stoics were absolute masters of this cognitive regulation.
Oh, the best.
Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way."
The classic quote.
They didn't just tolerate adversity, they actively reframed it. They trained their brains to view inevitable difficulties not as unfair punishments, but as the exact environmental resistance required to practice virtue.
We see a visceral modern application of this Stoic framing in the ultra-athlete David Goggins.
Oh man, Goggins is intense.
He really is. But he highlights the stark contrast between creating a lofty goal in a comfortable environment and actually executing it when reality sets in.
Right.
It's easy to plan a new identity when you are warm and motivated. But what happens when your metric dictates you must run today, and you wake up to a blizzard and it's -2 degrees outside?
Every fiber of your biology is screaming at you to stay under the covers and conserve heat. So how do you practically execute behavioral activation when every fiber of your being just wants to stay in bed? How do you bypass that massive biological resistance when all motivation vanishes?
You utilize a core component of cognitive behavioral therapy known as behavioral activation.
Behavioral activation.
Right. The common misconception is that we need to feel motivated in order to act.
Yeah, people wait for motivation to strike.
But behavioral activation completely flips that causality.
Yeah.
It dictates that you must act before you feel the motivation. Action precedes mood.
You essentially hack the dopamine system backward.
Exactly.
By refusing to engage with the massive dread of the blizzard and instead just executing a tiny 2-minute step like, say, just putting on your thermal socks, you provide your brain with undeniable physical proof of momentum.
You prove you're doing it.
Right, and that tiny success generates a micro hit of dopamine, which then synthesizes the actual feeling of motivation needed to take the next step.
You're casting a physical vote for your new identity, actively overriding the basal ganglia's demand for comfort.
But what happens when you fail?
Right, because a critical part of this long-term journey is managing the inevitable slip-ups. You will have days where the basal ganglia wins.
It's unavoidable.
Totally. The sources emphasize a technique called cognitive restructuring, which trains you to view these failures not as permanent flaws in your character, but as vital data points. Psychologists refer to this adaptation as post-traumatic growth.
And a massive mechanism for maintaining this forward momentum is the active practice of forgiveness.
Yes.
The Daily Stoic material points out that holding on to anger or guilt, whether directed at yourself for missing a workout or at someone else who wronged you, is a massive drain on your cognitive energy.
It's exhausting.
Marcus Aurelius dealt with constant betrayals as a Roman emperor, and his fundamental tactic for dealing with enemies was simply to not be like that.
That is a profound strategy for energy conservation.
Yeah.
Forgiveness isn't necessarily about moral high ground. It is literally about reclaiming your mental bandwidth.
Reclaiming bandwidth.
Yeah. If you refuse to forgive, Your amygdala remains in a state of heightened threat detection, constantly referencing the scars of the past. You literally remain biologically anchored to previous events.
So by forgiving yourself for a lapse in your systems or releasing anger toward a colleague, you shut down those open loops in your brain.
And close the loops.
You free up the metabolically expensive cognitive energy in your prefrontal cortex so you can redirect it toward your own self-directed neuroplasticity. You clear the slate so you can continue the deliberate practice of becoming who you want to be.
We have journeyed through the complete architecture of human change today.
Oh, really have.
We started by defining that lasting transformation requires adopting a new process-oriented identity rather than just chasing a superficial goal. We unpacked how the basal ganglia traps us in experience-dependent habit loops and how we can forcefully intervene using self-directed neuroplasticity and the catch-check-change method.
We looked at how to systemize execution by leveraging the Zeigarnik effect through the 2-minute rule and how to properly map our metrics using SMART goals to literally shift blood flow to the prefrontal cortex. We challenged the paradox of autopilot by demonstrating how deliberate practice demands cognitive discomfort to prevent arrested development. And finally, we explored how to protect this entire process from burnout using stoic reframing, behavioral activation, and the cognitive energy-saving power of forgiveness.
And all of this evidence leaves us with one final fascinating implication.
What's that?
Well, if self-directed neuroplasticity means your brain is continually physically rewiring its structure based on the specific actions you take and the discomfort you endure, it means you are biologically a completely different organism today than you were a year ago.
Wow.
Right. So what if the ideal self you are striving for is also a moving target? As your brain upgrades its own capacity, your potential horizon expands. Are we ever truly finished improving, or is the continuous uncomfortable act of becoming the only permanent state of human existence?
That is deep. Going back to our tree metaphor from the very beginning, you aren't just trying to tape new leaves onto dead branches. By intentionally challenging your neurochemistry, you are fundamentally altering the roots, the trunk, the entire underlying structure of the organism.
It's total transformation.
It's not a seasonal resolution. It is a lifelong, deliberate practice of growth. We invite you to find one small friction point today, even if it just takes 2 minutes, and step into the discomfort to cast a vote for your new identity. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.